The morning sun cast long shadows through the crystalline windows of the Vexarian royal palace. Queen Thessera sat in her private chamber, her forearms trembling as she read yet another resignation letter. This one was written in shaky handwriting, barely legible, from a nanny who had lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days. That was actually longer than the previous 2. 47 nannies in 6 months. 47 highly trained, highly recommended caregivers from across the galaxy. All of them had fled. Some left in the middle of the night without even collecting their belongings. Others had to be carried out by medical staff. One had simply vanished, leaving behind only a note that read, "I'm sorry I can't." Thessera crumpled the letter in her hand and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. Down below, she could see the maintenance staff going about their daily routines. Everything looked so peaceful, so normal. But up here in the West Wing where her sons lived, chaos ruled. The twin princes, Kalen and Riker. 7 years old and already the most feared children in the entire Vexarian Empire. Not because they were cruel or evil, but because they were powerful beyond measure and completely unable to control it. The door to her chamber burst open. Not by hand but by pure telekinetic force. 2 small figures stood in the doorway, their purple skin gleaming in the morning light, their 4 eyes wide with what looked like pride. Kalen and Riker. Her babies. Her impossible, beautiful, terrifying babies. "Mother, the new nanny left," Kalen announced, his voice matter-of-fact. Behind him, furniture in the hallway was floating in mid-air, spinning slowly like planets in orbit. "She called us monsters," Riker added, his tentacles twitching with barely contained energy. Just like the others. Thessera felt her heart break a little more. She knelt down to their level, trying to smile. "You are not monsters. You are my sons. You are princes of Vexar." "Then why does everyone run away?" Kalen asked. His voice was small now, vulnerable. It was the voice of a scared child, not a destructive force of nature. Before Thessera could answer, there was a loud crash from their playroom. A crystal chandelier, priceless and ancient, had fallen. Or rather, had been dropped from where it had been levitating near the ceiling. Riker winced, his tentacles curling inward with guilt. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I was just trying to make it spin like the pretty lights do." This was the pattern. The twins didn't set out to destroy things. They didn't wake up planning chaos. But their powers were too strong, too wild, too unpredictable. When they felt happy, objects would dance through the air. When they felt sad, walls would crack. When they felt angry, well, that's when the nannies usually started running. Royal Advisor Krenthus appeared in the doorway, his scales shifting to a concerned shade of green. "Your Majesty, the Council is demanding answers. They're saying the princes are a danger to the realm. Some are even suggesting that they be sent away for special containment training." "No." Thessera's voice was steel. "They are children. They will not be locked away like criminals." "But Your Majesty, we've tried everything. The best educators from 12 different species. Child psychologists from the most advanced civilizations. Even a behavioral specialist from the Kronar Empire, famous for handling difficult cases. Nothing works." Thessera looked at her sons, who were now clinging to each other, sensing the adults' fear and frustration. Their powers made the air shimmer around them, a visible sign of their anxiety. She had tried being firm with them. That only made things worse. She had tried being gentle. That hadn't worked either. She had tried giving them space and giving them structure. She had tried rewards and consequences. Nothing reached them. Nothing helped them feel safe enough to relax, to let their guard down, to trust. The truth was simple and heartbreaking. Her sons weren't bad children. They were scared children with abilities that terrified even them. Every time they accidentally hurt someone or broke something valuable, they hated themselves a little more. And that self-hatred made their powers even more unstable. It was a vicious cycle with no end in sight. In the maintenance wing, 3 floors below and a world away from the royal drama, Jake Morrison pushed his cleaning cart down the long corridor. He was humming an old tune from Earth, something his grandmother used to sing. The sound echoed pleasantly off the marble walls. Jake had worked at the palace for 3 years now. At 62 years old, he figured he'd earned a peaceful retirement doing simple work in an exotic location. After raising his daughter Lisa back on Earth and watching her become a successful teacher, he'd wanted one last adventure before he got too old to enjoy it. The job was perfect. Clean the floors, polish the windows, fix small things that broke. No stress, no complications. Just honest work that let him think his own thoughts and enjoy the beautiful architecture of an alien palace. He heard running footsteps and looked up to see another one of those fancy nannies sprinting past him, tears streaming down her blue face. She was clutching her bag and muttering something about never accepting another royal contract. Jake stepped aside to let her pass, then calmly went back to mopping. This was the 5th one he'd seen run away this month. Maybe 6th. He'd lost count. Whatever was happening in that West Wing, it must be pretty intense. But it wasn't his business. He was just the janitor. He cleaned up messes, literal ones, not complicated family situations. Still, he couldn't help but feel a little curious. And maybe, just maybe, a little concerned. Because once, about a week ago, he'd been cleaning near the prince's quarters when he saw them. 2 small kids, purple and strange-looking, sure, but still just kids. They'd been watching him work through a crack in their door, their eyes wide with fascination as he operated the floor buffer. He'd given them a little wave. They'd both jumped back, startled, but then one of them had waved back. Just a small gesture, tentative and shy. It had made Jake smile. Kids were kids, no matter what planet they came from. That's what his daughter Lisa always said. She taught kindergarten and dealt with all kinds of challenging behaviors. Her philosophy was simple. Every difficult child was just a scared child wearing a tough mask. Jake finished mopping his section and moved on to the next corridor, still humming. He had no idea that in a few hours, his simple, peaceful life was about to get very complicated. And that 2 impossible children were about to find exactly what they needed in the most unlikely person imaginable. Queen Thessera sat alone in her office long after the sun had set. The palace was quiet now, but her mind was anything but peaceful. Spread across her desk were personnel files, recommendations from various specialists, and reports from the latest incident. Another destroyed room. Another traumatized caretaker. Another failure. She pulled up the holographic display showing the palace staff directory. Hundreds of employees. Guards, cooks, advisors, teachers, diplomats. All highly qualified. All professionals in their fields. And not a single one of them could help her sons. Her fingers scrolled through the list absently, not really looking for anything in particular. Then something caught her eye. A name in the maintenance department. Jake Morrison. Human. 3 years of service. Perfect attendance record. 0 complaints. 0 incidents. Humans. She didn't know much about them. They were a relatively new species to join the galactic community, still considered somewhat primitive by most standards. They had no natural armor, no telepathic abilities, no advanced sensory organs. Just soft skin and stubborn determination. But there was something else in Jake's file. A note from the head of palace security. Staff morale improves significantly in sections where Morrison works. Reason unknown. Recommend retention. Thessera leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. It was ridiculous. Completely absurd. A janitor with no training, no credentials, no experience with Vexarian children. The council would think she'd lost her mind. Royal advisor Krenthis would probably resign in protest. But what did she have to lose? 47 qualified professionals had failed. Maybe it was time to try something completely different. Maybe, just maybe, the answer wasn't in finding someone more qualified. Maybe it was in finding someone who would see her sons differently. She pressed the communication button. Bring me Jake Morrison from maintenance. Immediately. 20 minutes later, Jake stood in the Queen's office, still wearing his gray work uniform. He carried his mop bucket in one hand, not sure if he should set it down or not. He'd never been called to the royal quarters before. His heart was pounding, wondering if he'd accidentally broken some protocol he didn't know about. Queen Thessera studied him carefully. He was older than she expected, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. Not lines of stress though. They looked more like laugh lines, the kind you get from smiling for decades. His posture was relaxed but respectful. He met her eyes without fear but also without arrogance. Jake Morrison, she began, her voice formal. You work in maintenance, correct? Yes, Your Majesty. 3 years now. Mostly the East and West Wings. The West Wing. That's near my son's quarters. Jake nodded. Yes, ma'am. Beautiful section. Those marble floors are real craftsmanship. Not like the synthetic stuff they use in newer buildings. Thessera blinked. He was talking about the floors. Here she was, about to make the strangest request of her reign, and he was commenting on architectural details. There was something almost refreshing about it. Have you encountered my sons? The Princes Kalen and Riker? Oh sure, Jake said, his face brightening. Nice kids. They watch me work sometimes through their doorway. Curious little guys. Last week I showed them how the floor buffer works. Riker really liked the spinning brushes. Asked me all kinds of questions about how it cleans. Thessera felt something tighten in her chest. Nice kids. When was the last time anyone had called her sons nice? Everyone else used words like dangerous, unstable, challenging, impossible. But this human janitor just said nice kids, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You know they've injured several caretakers? She asked carefully. Jake scratched his beard thoughtfully. Well, I heard some commotion now and then. Saw a few people running out pretty upset. But the boys never seemed mean to me. Just seemed like they were having a rough time. A rough time? Thessera repeated slowly. They have telekinetic powers they cannot control. They destroy everything around them. They've gone through 47 nannies in 6 months. 47? Wow. Jake let out a low whistle. That's a lot of strangers coming and going. Must be hard on them, never knowing who's going to walk through the door next. Never having anyone stick around long enough to actually know them. Thessera stood up and walked to the window. This human, this simple maintenance worker, had just articulated something that all her expensive advisors had missed. Her sons didn't just have a power control problem. They had a trust problem. How could they ever feel safe enough to control their abilities when everyone around them was either terrified or temporary? Jake Morrison, she said, turning back to face him. I have an unusual proposal for you. Okay, Jake said, setting down his mop bucket finally. I want you to take care of my sons. There was a long silence. Jake's eyebrows went up. Ma'am, I'm a janitor. I clean floors. I'm not a teacher or a nanny or whatever fancy title those other folks had. Exactly, Thessera said. Every qualified professional has failed. They come with methods and training and protocols. They see problems to fix, behaviors to correct. But you see nice kids who like floor buffers. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this. Your Majesty, I'm honored you'd think of me, but I don't know the first thing about raising alien princes. I raised one daughter back on Earth and that was challenging enough. Tell me about your daughter. Jake's face softened immediately. Lisa? She's a kindergarten teacher now. Wonderful kid, though she gave me plenty of gray hairs growing up. Strong-willed, that one. Used to throw tantrums that could shake the house. Not literally, of course, but you know what I mean. How did you handle her tantrums? Well, Jake thought back, I learned pretty quick that you can't fight fire with fire. When she got upset, she needed space to feel what she was feeling. Then she needed someone to listen without judging. And most importantly, she needed to know I wasn't going anywhere. No matter how many times she tested me, I'd still be there in the morning. Thessera felt tears prick at her eyes. You're hired. Wait, what? Just like that. Just like that. Standard salary for a royal caretaker is. Your Majesty, Jake interrupted gently, if I may. I don't need a fancy title or a big salary. But I do have one condition. Name it. I still want to do my regular cleaning work. Helps me think. Keeps me grounded. Plus, I like the routine. Thessera smiled for the first time in weeks. Agreed. You start tomorrow morning. After Jake left, Royal Advisor Krenthis stormed into the office. He'd heard about the decision through the palace communication network. His scales were flashing red with agitation. Your Majesty, please tell me this is some kind of joke. A human janitor? What will the council say? What will the noble families think? Thessera looked at him calmly. They will think I'm trying something new. And if they complain, they are welcome to volunteer themselves to care for Kalen and Riker. Krenthis opened his mouth, then closed it again. No one wanted that job. No one except, apparently, one elderly human who thought her sons were nice kids. Give him 1 week, Thessera said firmly. If he fails like the others, we'll find another solution. But Krenthis were out of options. Let the human try. That night, Jake sat in his small quarters, wondering what he'd just agreed to. Tomorrow he'd be responsible for 2 powerful alien princes who had terrified dozens of trained professionals. He had no plan, no strategy, no special techniques. All he had was the same approach he'd used with Lisa all those years ago. Show up, be consistent, listen more than you talk, and never give up on them. He just hoped it would be enough. Jake woke up at 5 in the morning just like he always did. He made himself a cup of coffee using the strange alien machine in his quarters that never quite got the temperature right, and sat by the window watching the twin suns rise over the Vexarian landscape. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what he was about to do. By 7 o'clock, he was standing outside the prince's quarters with his cleaning cart. Nothing fancy, nothing different from any other day. Just his regular supplies, his mop, his bucket, and a thermos of that weird coffee. He'd thought about bringing toys or educational materials, but something told him that would be a mistake. Those kids had probably seen every fancy gadget and learning tool in the galaxy. What they hadn't seen was someone just being normal around them. He knocked on the door. No answer. He could hear movement inside though and what sounded like whispering. The princes were awake and knew he was there. "Morning Kalen, morning Riker," Jake called through the door. "It's Jake, the floor guy. Your mom asked me to hang out with you today. I'm coming in now, okay?" He opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The room looked like a tornado had hit it. Furniture was overturned, toys were scattered everywhere, and there were scorch marks on the walls from what he guessed was telekinetic energy. The previous nanny must have had quite an exit. The twins were at opposite ends of the room, watching him with their 4 eyes wide and cautious. Kalen was standing on top of an overturned bookshelf, his tentacles wrapped defensively around himself. Riker was crouched behind a floating chair that was hovering about 3 feet off the ground, clearly held there by his power. Jake didn't react to any of it. He just pushed his cart into the room and started setting up like he would for any normal cleaning job. "Quite a mess in here," he said conversationally. "That's okay though. Messes can be fixed. That's kind of my specialty." He started picking up toys and putting them in a basket. A stuffed creature that looked like a cross between a bear and an octopus. Building blocks made of some kind of crystalline material. A half-broken puzzle showing what he assumed was a Vexarian landscape. Something whizzed past his head. A small metal toy ship, flying through the air at considerable speed. It was clearly a test. Jake reached up calmly and caught it mid-flight, his reflexes still pretty good despite his age. He examined it for a moment. "Nice throw, Kalen," he said, setting the ship on a shelf. "You've got good aim. My daughter Lisa used to throw things too when she was upset, though she couldn't make them fly on their own. This telekinesis thing you've got is pretty impressive." Kalen's eyes widened. How did the human know it was him who threw it? And why wasn't he angry? Jake continued cleaning, working around the chaos like it was the most normal thing in the world. A lamp floated past him. He gently guided it back to its table. Books started flying off shelves. He ducked under one and caught another, stacking them neatly as he went. "You know what I like about cleaning?" Jake said, talking to fill the silence. "It's honest work. You see a mess, you clean it up, and at the end you can look around and see what you accomplished. There's something satisfying about that." More objects started flying. Faster now, more aggressive. The twins were really testing him. A cushion hit him in the back. He turned around and picked it up, fluffing it before placing it back on the couch. A toy block bounced off his shoulder. He caught it and added it to the others. For a full hour, Jake just cleaned while the twins threw their telekinetic tantrum. He didn't get angry, didn't tell them to stop, didn't threaten consequences. He just kept working, occasionally commenting on things. "That was a good spin on that one. Whoa, you almost got me that time. This room's going to look great when we're done." Finally, exhausted from the effort, the twins' assault slowed down. Objects stopped flying. The floating furniture gradually lowered to the ground. Jake was sweeping up some broken glass when he heard a small voice. "Why aren't you scared?" It was Riker, still hiding behind the chair but no longer making it float. Jake stopped sweeping and looked at the young prince directly. His expression was kind, open, completely genuine. "Why would I be scared of you? You're just kids figuring out your powers. That's got to be confusing and frustrating. My Lisa used to get so mad when she couldn't express what she was feeling. She'd cry and yell and slam doors. You guys can move stuff with your minds, which honestly is way cooler, but it's the same idea. You're just trying to tell me something." "We're monsters," Kalen said from his bookshelf perch. His voice was flat, like he was stating a fact he'd heard too many times to question anymore. Jake set down his broom and walked slowly toward the middle of the room, making sure to move in a way that wasn't threatening. He sat down cross-legged on the floor, right in the middle of all the chaos. "Who told you that?" "Everyone," Riker whispered. "The nannies. The teachers. We hear them talking in the hallways. They say we're dangerous. They say we can't be controlled." "Well, that's just silly," Jake said matter-of-factly. "You know what I see? I see 2 7-year-old kids who have abilities they're still learning about. You know what I was doing when I was 7? I was eating mud pies my friend dared me to try, and I fell out of a tree and broke my arm. You think you're monsters? I was basically a disaster on 2 legs." Kalen climbed down from the bookshelf slightly. "Really? Really? And you know what my dad did? He didn't call me a monster. He just helped me learn from my mistakes. Took time, took patience, but eventually I figured things out. You will too." Riker emerged from behind the chair. He was closer now, maybe 6 feet away instead of across the room. "The other nannies tried to make our powers go away. They had these special devices and training programs and rules." "Yeah, I bet they did," Jake nodded. "But here's the thing. Your powers aren't going away. They're part of who you are. So instead of trying to make them disappear, how about we figure out how to work with them? Like that floating chair thing you were doing. That took concentration, right? Riker nodded slowly. So you can control it when you focus. That's good. That's a start. We just need to practice that control in ways that don't feel scary or overwhelming. How? Kalen asked. He was standing normally now, no longer defensive. Jake smiled. Well, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I have no idea. I've never dealt with telekinesis before, so we're going to have to figure it out together. I'll tell you what though, how about we make a deal? You help me finish cleaning up this room, using your powers carefully and slowly, and then we can have some breakfast. I'm starving and I bet you are too. The twins looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Then Riker held out his hand and a toy slowly, very carefully, floated up from the floor. It wobbled in the air, but he guided it gently to a shelf. His face was scrunched up with concentration, his tentacles twitching with effort. Perfect. Jake encouraged. See, you've got this. Nice and easy. Kalen joined in, lifting blocks one at a time and stacking them in their container. It was slow work, much slower than just throwing everything around. But they were doing it. They were using their powers with control and purpose. Jake went back to his cleaning, working alongside them. And for the first time in 6 months, the prince's quarters were being cleaned up with cooperation instead of fear. It wasn't perfect. Objects still dropped occasionally when concentration slipped. A vase wobbled dangerously before Jake steadied it. But it was progress. Real progress. And by the time they finished, the room looked almost normal. The twins were exhausted from the mental effort, but there was something different in their eyes. Something that hadn't been there before. Pride Point 2 weeks had passed since Jake's first day with the princes, and the palace staff couldn't believe what they were seeing. Or rather, what they weren't seeing. No explosions. No screaming. No caregivers running through the halls in tears. The West Wing had become oddly, almost suspiciously, quiet. Royal Advisor Krenthis walked past the prince's quarters one morning and stopped dead in his tracks. Through the open door he could see Jake sitting on the floor with Kalen and Riker, all three of them laughing. Actually laughing. The twins were using their telekinesis to make toy ships do loop-de-loops in the air while Jake provided sound effects like a kid himself. Whoosh! And there goes Riker's ship through the asteroid field. Oh no, watch out for that space debris. Nice dodge. Krenthis shook his head in disbelief and kept walking. He'd never understand humans. Jake had settled into a routine with the boys, but it wasn't the kind of rigid schedule the previous nannies had tried to enforce. His routine was more like a rhythm, flexible and natural. Mornings were for what he called power practice. He'd set up obstacle courses using furniture and toys, and the twins would navigate their ships through them using only telekinesis. It was like a game, but it taught them precision and control. The trick is, Jake explained one morning, you're not trying to force the object to obey you. You're working with it, guiding it. Like dancing with a partner instead of dragging them across the floor. Kalen concentrated hard, his tongue sticking out slightly as he maneuvered his ship through a narrow gap between two cushions. It's hard. My brain gets tired. That's normal, Jake assured him. Your powers are like muscles. The more you use them the right way, the stronger they get. But muscles need rest too. That's why we take breaks. And they did take breaks. Lots of them. Jake had learned that the previous nanny's biggest mistake was pushing too hard. They tried to fill every minute with lessons and improvement exercises. But the twins were just kids. They needed downtime. They needed to just be. Afternoons became story time. Jake would pull up a chair and the boys would settle in, sometimes sitting, sometimes floating lazily in the air as they listened. He told them stories from Earth. Not the fancy educational kind, but real stories. Stories about his own childhood, about his daughter Lisa, about humanity's history. So there was this guy named Thomas Edison, Jake said one afternoon. And he was trying to invent the light bulb. You know how many times he failed before he got it right? How many? Riker asked, completely absorbed. Over 1,000 times. Can you imagine? 1,000 failures. But he didn't call them failures. He said he just found 1,000 ways that didn't work. Kalen floated down from where he'd been hovering near the ceiling. So making mistakes is okay? Making mistakes is how we learn, Jake said firmly. Every single successful person in history failed a bunch of times first. The difference is they kept trying. The twins absorbed these lessons in ways that formal education never reached them. Because Jake wasn't teaching from some curriculum. He was just sharing his life, his values, his understanding of the world. And somehow that made all the difference. Evenings were for what Jake called real talk. This was when the structure completely disappeared and they just sat together and talked. About anything. About everything. About the things that scared them or confused them or made them angry. One evening, as the twin suns sat outside their window painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Riker said something that broke Jake's heart. Everyone expects us to be perfect. We're princes. We're supposed to be strong and smart and never make mistakes. But Jake, we mess up all the time. We try so hard to control our powers and then something happens and we break things and hurt people and everyone looks at us like we're terrible. His tentacles were curled up tight against his body, a sign of distress Jake had learned to recognize. Kalen wasn't floating anymore. He sat on the floor, hugging his knees, looking smaller than his 7 years. Jake moved to sit between them on the floor. You want to know a secret? Nobody's perfect. Not me, not your mom, not anyone in this whole palace. Perfection isn't real. It's just a story people tell themselves. But you're always calm, Kalen protested. Nothing bothers you. Jake laughed softly. Oh buddy, lots of things bother me. I just don't let them control me. And you know what? I mess up too. Just yesterday I mixed up the cleaning solution wrong and had to redo an entire hallway. The day before that I forgot where I put my favorite mop. I'm 62 years old and I still can't figure out how to use the coffee maker in my room properly. Riker giggled despite his sadness. Really? Really? Being an adult doesn't mean you stop making mistakes. It just means you get better at handling them. Jake paused, choosing his next words carefully. And here's something else. You two aren't just princes who happen to have powers. You're Kalen and Riker. Two kids who like stories and toy ships and making me laugh with your silly jokes. The powers are part of you, but they're not all of you. This concept seemed to hit them hard. For so long, everyone had defined them entirely by their abilities. The dangerous twins. The unstable heirs. The children who couldn't be controlled. No one had bothered to see who they were beyond their telekinesis. Jake started teaching them breathing techniques that his daughter Lisa had learned in her teacher training. Simple exercises to calm the mind and body. When you feel your powers getting out of control, it's usually because you're feeling something big. Scared, angry, frustrated, whatever. These feelings aren't bad. But we need to feel them without letting them take over. They practiced together every evening. Breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4, breathing out for 4. It seemed too simple to work, but it did. When Riker got frustrated during power practice, he'd stop and breathe. When Kalen felt overwhelmed, he'd close his eyes and count his breaths. The changes were remarkable. Queen Thessera watched through the monitoring system in her office, tears streaming down her face almost every day. Her sons were transforming. Not because Jake was suppressing their powers or forcing them into some mold, but because he was helping them understand themselves. One afternoon, Jake set up a new challenge. He placed a feather on the floor. Okay, today's goal is to make this feather float and keep it floating for 1 whole minute. No wobbling, no dropping it, just smooth and steady. It was much harder than moving heavier objects. The feather was so light that even the slightest variation in telekinetic force would send it shooting up to the ceiling or falling to the floor. It required the kind of delicate control the twins had never developed. Kalen went first. He focused hard and the feather lifted. It shot up toward the ceiling. He tried to stop it, overcorrected, and it fell. He tried again. Same result. His tentacles started sparking with frustration, that old familiar feeling that usually preceded destruction. Hold on, Jake said gently. Remember what we talked about. The frustration is information. It's telling you something. What's it telling you? Kalen took a shaky breath. That I'm trying too hard. That I'm forcing it instead of guiding it. Exactly. So what do you need to do? Breathe. Relax. Try softer. Kalen closed his eyes, took 3 deep breaths and tried again. This time the feather rose slowly, gently, and hovered at eye level. It wobbled a little, but he adjusted carefully. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 20. You're doing it. Riker cheered. The feather immediately shot upward from Kalen's broken concentration, but he was grinning anyway. I did it. Did you see that, Jake? I kept it steady for like 20 seconds. I saw it. I'm proud of you. And Jake meant it. He was proud of both of them every single day. Riker tried next and managed 15 seconds. They spent the whole afternoon working on the feather exercise, taking turns, encouraging each other, celebrating small victories. There was no anger, no destruction, no fear. Just 2 kids learning, growing, and most importantly, believing in themselves. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Jake sat in his quarters thinking about how far they'd come. They still had hard days. They still made mistakes. But they were learning that mistakes weren't the end of the world. They were just part of the journey. And for the first time in their young lives, Kaylin and Riker had someone who wasn't going anywhere, no matter how many times they messed up. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison started working with the princes. 6 months that felt like a lifetime of change. The palace staff had stopped whispering about when the human would finally break and run away. Now they whispered about something else entirely, something nobody had thought possible. The twin princes were thriving. But outside the palace walls, rumors had been spreading across the galaxy. Dark rumors about unstable heirs to the Vexarian throne. Political opponents were using the princes' past behavior as ammunition, suggesting they were too dangerous to ever rule. The Galactic Council, that vast assembly of alien civilizations, had taken notice. They'd sent word that they were coming to evaluate the situation personally. Queen Thessera stood at her office window, watching diplomatic ships land in the palace courtyard. Representatives from 12 different species were arriving, all of them important, all of them skeptical. She could see it in their body language as they emerged from their vessels. They expected to find chaos. They expected to recommend that her sons be removed from the line of succession, possibly sent away for containment training at some remote facility. The thought made her blood run cold. But she couldn't let her fear show. Today her sons would face their greatest test yet, and she had to believe in them. More importantly, she had to believe in Jake. In the West Wing, Jake was helping the twins get ready. They were wearing formal royal attire, which they absolutely hated. Kaylin kept tugging at his ceremonial collar, and Riker's tentacles wouldn't stop fidgeting with the ornate buttons on his jacket. "I know it's uncomfortable," Jake said, straightening Kaylin's collar for the third time. "But sometimes we've got to dress up for important occasions. Think of it like armor. You're warriors going into battle, except your weapons are your manners and your control. What if we mess up?" Riker asked, his voice small and scared. "What if I get nervous and make something break? What if they decide we're too dangerous?" Jake knelt down to their eye level, something he'd done countless times over the past 6 months. "Listen to me, both of you. You've worked so hard. You've learned so much. But here's the thing, even if something does go wrong, even if you do make a mistake, that doesn't define who you are. You're not perfect. Nobody is. What matters is that you try your best and you support each other. But what if they take us away?" Kaylin's eyes were wet with tears he was trying to hold back. "What if they say we can't stay with you and Mom anymore?" Jake felt his own throat tighten. These boys had become like family to him over the past months. The thought of them being taken away, locked up in some facility, treated like dangerous objects instead of children, it made him angrier than he'd been in years. But he couldn't show that anger. Right now they needed his strength. "That's not going to happen," he said firmly. "Because you're going to walk into that throne room and show them exactly who you are. Not scary princes with uncontrollable powers. Just Kaylin and Riker. 2 smart, kind, amazing kids who happen to have a special gift." The throne room was packed with dignitaries. Council members sat in the special viewing area, their various forms of taking notes creating a symphony of clicks, taps, and electronic hums. Royal Advisor Krenthis stood near the Queen, looking more nervous than anyone had ever seen him. The entire future of the Vexarian royal line hung in the balance. The massive doors at the end of the hall opened. Jake walked in first, wearing the closest thing he had to formal clothes, which was basically his cleanest work uniform with a borrowed formal jacket over it. He'd refused the fancy robes they'd tried to give him, saying he worked better in his own clothes. Behind him came Kaylin and Riker, walking side by side, their heads held high despite their obvious nervousness. The crowd murmured. Some in surprise, some in skepticism, some in barely concealed hostility. These were the infamous twins they'd heard so much about? They looked so small, so young, so ordinary despite their alien features. Queen Thessera stood from her throne. "Honored council members, distinguished guests, thank you for coming. You are here to evaluate whether my sons are fit to someday inherit the throne. I believe the best way to answer that question is to let them show you themselves." She nodded to Jake, who guided the boys to the center of the room. A large table had been set up with various objects on it. Crystals, metal spheres, delicate glass figurines, and in the center, a complex puzzle made of dozens of interlocking pieces. The head of the Galactic Council, a being called Elder Vormak with skin like tree bark and eyes that glowed faintly blue, spoke in a voice that echoed through the hall. "We have been told these children possess immense telekinetic power but lack control. We have heard reports of destruction, injury, and chaos. If they are to be future rulers, they must demonstrate not just power, but wisdom and restraint." Jake whispered to the twins, "Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about showing them what you've learned. Together. Kalen and Riker stepped forward. They closed their eyes for a moment, doing the breathing exercise Jake had taught them. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. Their tentacles stopped fidgeting. Their bodies relaxed. When they opened their eyes again, there was focus there, determination, and something else. Confidence. They raised their hands together, and the puzzle pieces began to lift from the table. Not all at once in a chaotic rush, but slowly, deliberately, one piece at a time. The pieces floated into the air and began to arrange themselves. The twins' faces showed concentration but not strain. They practiced this for weeks, learning to work together, to coordinate their powers, to communicate without words. The puzzle came together in mid-air, each piece sliding into place with precision. It formed a 3-dimensional representation of the Vexarian star system, beautiful and intricate. The crowd gasped. This wasn't just control. This was artistry. But then something happened. One of the pieces wobbled. Riker's concentration had slipped for just a moment, distracted by the sound of someone in the audience shifting loudly. The piece started to fall, and if it hit the ground, the whole structure might collapse. In the old days, this would have been the moment where panic set in, where fear would cause the twins to lose all control, where everything would explode into chaos. The council members leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable disaster. But Kalen didn't panic. He simply adjusted his focus, gently catching the falling piece with his telekinesis while Riker took a breath and steadied himself. They shared a quick glance, the kind of silent communication that twins sometimes have, and Riker guided the piece back into place. The entire structure held steady. They weren't perfect. They'd made a mistake. But they'd handled it with grace and teamwork. Next, they demonstrated something even more impressive. Kalen lifted one of the delicate glass figurines, something that would shatter if dropped. He made it dance through the air in a slow, careful ballet. Meanwhile, Riker worked with the metal spheres, creating a rotating pattern around his brother's floating figurine. They were multitasking, coordinating, showing not just power but the kind of sophisticated control that took months of patient practice to develop. Finally, they lowered everything back to the table. Gently, carefully, each object finding its place. Nothing broken. Nothing dropped. Nothing destroyed. The throne room was silent. Then Elder Vormak stood up. His ancient face was unreadable. In my 300 years serving on the council, I have never seen such a transformation. 6 months ago, by all reports, these children were uncontrollable. Today they have demonstrated remarkable skill and maturity. He turned to look at Jake, who was standing to the side, trying to stay out of the spotlight. You are the human responsible for this change? Jake stepped forward reluctantly. Yes, sir. Though really the boys did all the hard work. I just spent time with them and helped them believe in themselves. What are your qualifications? What training do you have in working with telekinetic youth? None, Jake admitted. I'm a janitor. I clean floors. Before coming to Vexar, I worked in maintenance back on Earth. Raised one daughter, and that's about it for my credentials. The council members looked at each other, confused. One of them, a floating entity of pure energy, spoke up. This makes no sense. We sent our finest educators, our most experienced child development specialists, our top telekinetic trainers. All failed. Yet a janitor with no qualifications succeeded? Jake scratched his head, thinking about how to explain it. Well, with respect, maybe that was the problem. Everyone else saw a problem to fix. I just saw 2 kids who needed someone to believe in them. They didn't need another person trying to control them or change them. They needed someone to accept them as they were and help them grow from there. Queen Thessera stepped forward, her voice strong and proud. This human accomplished what our greatest minds could not. Not through force or credentials or advanced training, but through simple wisdom. He treated powerful children as children who happened to be powerful. He gave them patience, consistency, and unconditional acceptance. Elder Vormak looked at the twins, who stood together holding hands, supporting each other. Then he looked at Jake, this ordinary human who'd done the extraordinary. Finally, he looked at Queen Thessera. The council's evaluation is complete. We find that the Princes Kalen and Riker have demonstrated sufficient control, maturity, and judgment to remain in the line of succession. Furthermore, we recommend that the human Jake Morrison be formally recognized for his service and that his methods be studied and shared with other worlds facing similar challenges. The throne room erupted in applause. Krenthus actually smiled, his scales flushing a pleasant green. Queen Thessera wiped tears from her eyes. But the best part was watching Kalen and Riker run to Jake, who caught them both in a big hug, their formal ceremony forgotten in the moment of pure joy. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Word spread across the galaxy about the human who'd helped the Vexarian princes. Other species, other royal families, other parents struggling with powerful children began reaching out. They wanted to know Jake's secret. They wanted human advisors of their own. Turns out, humans had spent thousands of years raising children without any powers at all, which made them uniquely qualified to help young beings who had too much power too soon. Earth suddenly found itself in high demand as a source of childcare wisdom, which nobody back home could quite believe. Jake was offered a formal position as Royal Child Development Advisor with a salary that made his jaw drop. He accepted but kept one condition. He still did his cleaning work every morning. It kept him grounded, he said. Plus, he genuinely enjoyed it. Most mornings you could find him mopping the palace floors with two young princes floating beside him, using their telekinesis to guide dust particles into perfect spiraling patterns. Sometimes Queen Thessera would join them, learning from this unlikely teacher that the greatest strength wasn't power, but the wisdom to know when gentleness was the answer. Kalen and Riker grew up to become the most beloved rulers in Vexarian history. They were known for their fairness, their compassion, and their ability to truly listen to their people. And they never forgot the human janitor who'd seen them not as threats or problems or even as princes, but simply as two scared kids who just needed someone to stick around long enough to know them. Years later, when Jake finally retired and returned to Earth, the twins commissioned a statue in his honor. It showed a simple human man with a mop, and the inscription read, "To Jake Morrison, who taught us that true power lies not in what you can do, but in who you choose to be." Sometimes the impossible just needs someone who doesn't know it's impossible. Someone who sees children first and power second. Someone who shows up, stays consistent, and never gives up. Sometimes all it takes is one person who cares. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.